This video is brought to you by Lighter Creative and their new line of gaming mats. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. This is the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from competitive events in the last week and talk about what's winning. And this is going to be an interesting one. The metagame is dominated by a couple of factions. However, we do see some little interesting spots of light in an otherwise decrepit shadow. This includes things like Orks coming back with a GT win, Chaos Demons, Tau Empire, Tyranids, and Adeptus Custodes, which we'll be focusing on today. I am currently on the road coming back from the Tennessee Elite Open Team Edition, a 5-player team event that I spent all weekend live streaming. Please go check out my coverage if you're interested in Team Warhammer 40k and seeing some of these lists in action. I'm also going to be on the road for the next week or so, traveling between some live streams. So I hope that my audio quality doesn't sound too bad, but I do plan on continuing my regular upload schedule. That said, you can catch me on the Angry Joe Show on Tuesday, August 5th. That's twitch.tv/Angry Joe Show. I'll also be live streaming the Lone Star Open here on this channel next weekend. That will be the weekend of August 9th and 10th. I'll drop a link down in the video description for the link to that stream. But with that, let's get into the meta right now and talk about the metagame breakdown. Now, obviously, top of the meta right now is not a huge shocker. It is Death Guard. They have continued to absolutely dominate things, and one list has kind of risen above the rest. We'll talk about, generally speaking, what that list looks like in this video, and then kind of move on, because the faction is a little bit stagnant, no pun intended, in what it's currently doing. Death Guard took down the Baja Open, Grand Onslaught 10, Valley of the Moon Open, Saw Must Go On, and Clown Massacre GT. We also saw a little bit of pushback against them from another Chaos Cult faction, the Thousand Suns, who took down the One Thick GT, as well as Conclaribe Meks. Chaos Knights, also unsurprisingly, doing fairly well, taking down the Big Sky Open, as well as tying with Imperial Knights at the Alpine Summer Sprint. That was a differential scoring event, so ties are much easier, but they did tie to get first place, which is why we'll be talking about them this time around. Moving on from there, the Salt City GT4 was won by Aeldari. Blood Angels took down another major level event, Kent Major, 100 players. Leagues of Votann actually took second place at the Saw Must Go On event just underneath Death Guard. Necrons took down the Lock and Load event, Tyranids winning the BC Barbecue Brawl. Tau Empire, also undefeated at the One Thick GT. Chaos Demons winning the Midgard GT. Astra Militarum at the Slanesh Summer Slam 2. Shalaxi's Revenge. That was an Iron Man GT, so a single-day 5-round event. Orks with the Night Wolves Major Solo Tournament. And Adeptus Custodes, also with an undefeated result, alongside Death Guard at the Grand Onslaught 10. Now with that, let's dive into exactly what these lists look like, just after a word from our sponsors. This video is sponsored by Lighter Creative. Now, I've already talked about Lighter Creative on this channel in the past, and their cool and innovative mats as well as WTC-compatible terrain systems. But what they want me to talk to you about today is their updates to their battle mat system. Now, Lighter Creative uses this vinyl-style battle mat. It's a textured material with a felt backing, which makes it super-duper nice on your tabletop. While this is lighter than neoprene, it comes with a ton of advantages, including the fact that it can be folded up rather than requiring it to be rolled, because it won't crack and smooths out really easily once you lay it out on the tabletop. Lighter Creative previously created battle mats that were compatible for use with Warhammer 40k, including printed deployment zones and objective markers, and I'm happy to report that they have expanded their selection of these styles of mats, now including new designs. However, they also now have mats that are compatible with multiple game systems. This one, for example, this is a Kelty mat. It's a little baby guy. That's pretty cool, right? They also have less sci-fi themed designs if you're looking for something that's compatible with more of a fantasy game. That said, the Warhammer 40,000 mats do have a ton of advantages. They retain those cool deployment zone and objective marker printouts, as well as including a measurement grid, now with marked sections on the battlefield, so you can actually see very easily where things like your deployment zones or table quarters actually line up. This looks like such an incredible improvement in play experience and makes it easier to score out your objectives, in addition to kind of looking like a battlefield overlay, which is kind of sweet. So check out these mats in the links in the video description. If you're looking to grind games competitively, there's no better mat for you. Now we're going to start at the Grand Onslaught 10 Carnage. This was a 42-player event taking place in Hudson, Florida, and we're not really talking about it for any particular reason. It was won by Adeptus Custodes, who we will certainly be talking about later on in the video, but it also saw an undefeated result from basically the most basic Death Guard list ever made. And so we're going to take the opportunity to talk about exactly what the best Death Guard list in the metagame currently does. Steve Trimble went 5-0 at the event with a Mortarian's Hammer detachment. This detachment allows it to choose 2 units in the opponent's army at the start of the battle round and apply the affliction effect to them, giving them -1 toughness, as well as applying the effect of whatever your chosen contagion of Nurgle is. The big benefit there is that it can then use Death Shroud Terminators to use their 6-inch deep strike ability to deep strike close to enemies and hammer them from close range. We also are going to use the detachment's propensity for vehicles alongside a Lord of Virulence to buff blast weapons. He's also equipping the Tendrillist Emissions enhancement to give reroll 1s to wound against targets he can see, and also a lone operative effect allowing him to buff several vehicles. So we have essentially a shooting battery of a bunch of very strong long-range guns and artillery. So we have 2 Mephitic Bloodhounders. Those guys are dedicated anti-tank, especially in close range. 3 Plague Burst Crawlers, which can then make use of that affliction effect to debuff enemies and then hit them with Eruption of Spores with indirect fire weapons. And then if your opponent moves into range, we have 3 Fetid Blow Drones with heavy blight launchers that can just wildly outdamage them with hit rerolls from the Lord of Virulence, wound rerolls from Tendrillist Emissions, and then also benefiting from that affliction effect. We have some utility holding down the middle of the table with Poxwalkers, and the Poxwalkers will also often act as a contagion applicator. They can infiltrate into the center of the battlefield. If your opponent can't deal with them very quickly, they can just advance or charge up into enemies to apply affliction, allow Death Shroud Terminators to deep strike near them, and allow the guns to do more damage. So we have essentially a very flexible, incredibly powerful shooting battery in all of these light and medium vehicles, backed up by some reach. It's effectively infinite threat range melee because the Death Shroud Terminators can 6-inch deep strike next to any enemy unit that they choose. The only way to prevent this is things like Omni Scrambler Auras, which defeat the 6-inch deep strike effect that the Death Shroud Terminators have. So Space Marine Infiltrators are the best example, but just by using mass numbers of screens that your opponent can't contagion all of, so that you still have 9-inch deep strike bubbles somewhere. It's extremely difficult to stop, especially if you don't have very high model count. So the Death Shroud Terminators are able to prey on individual enemies, isolate them, charge them, and kill them. And with attached Lords of Contagion, they do absolutely ludicrous damage. They have lethal and sustained hits, plus lance, plus are also benefiting from affliction effects, meaning that they're mostly going to be hitting you with probably the equivalent of somewhere around strength 9, AP 3, 2 to 3 damage based on whether it's the actual Death Shroud Terminators or the Lord of Contagion swinging at you. So if you're not protected by particularly strong defensive characteristics, these guys might just kill you straight out, or if you are weakened by the long-range shooting, they can finish you off, which allows this army to essentially preserve the shooting battery for a while. Now, the other benefit there is that the Death Shroud Terminators are individually very difficult to kill. They're 4 wounds, T7, 2+, 4+, saving characteristics, and they provide their Lord of Contagion a 4+ Feel No Pain until the activation that kills them is over. So if you precision him, he will potentially Feel No Pain it, or if you kill the unit, he's still considered to be leading it until the end of that attack activation, meaning he still benefits from the 4+ Feel No Pain until you're finished attacking. So it is very difficult to get attacks on him. Even if you do, he's then going to potentially respawn at the end of the phase. He essentially has the equivalent of, like, if you consider all that together, somewhere around, I don't know, 17 or 18 wounds, which means actually getting rid of this guy is really annoying, and if you're not a super heavy vehicle, he can potentially just kill you by himself, even not benefiting from his leadership abilities. So it takes a overcommittal to actually kill the Lords of Contagion. They still die, and usually the games will end with few Lords of Contagion remaining on the battlefield, but that pulls so much focus from the gun line that they get an extra round of shooting at you, and that's usually crippling. This army is incredible at attrition, I guess appropriately for Death Guard, but it is also demonstrably extremely difficult to beat and extremely effective in terms of its raw damage output, as evidenced by the fact that Death Guard are absolutely blowing away the rest of the metagame right now. Now with that, we're going to move over to another Chaos sub-faction and talk about the One Thick Grand Tournament at Motor City Gaming. Say that 5 times fast. This was a 54-player event. Now the event was won by Tau Empire, and we will certainly be talking about them, but we also saw a follow-up result, second place from Kyle Treya running Thousand Suns. Kyle was playing what is become a relatively standard incarnation of Grand Coven Thousand Suns. This is the index-style detachment where you can choose special buff to grant your psychic weapons, either extended range, +1 to wound, or devastating wounds. We have an Exalted Sorcerer on a Disc of Tzeentch with Incandium to allow him to Doom Bolt twice, which potentially, when you are on a go turn and you're trying to pump as much damage out of your army, those additional mortal wounds from that second activation are absolutely crucial. Thousand Suns benefit a ton from actually removing enemy threats. They don't really want to just deal dispersed damage because their units are typically so fragile on the swing back, they're going to lose a lot of efficiency just by taking random attacks on Rubric Marines. So being able to ensure that you have exactly enough damage output to kill everything you need to in a turn, especially your go turn when you reveal your army, is vital. We have a second Infernal Master, as well as an Infernal Master with the Eldritch Vortex of its half. Magnus the Red, a Sorcerer with the Umbralific Crystal to allow his unit to jump up into the sky and then deep strike again in your subsequent movement phase. Chosen in the command phase, which is very nice timing for that, plus a Zangor Shaman for some utility. We then have 3 units of Rubric Marines, so 1 for the Sorcerer, 2 for the Infernal Masters. Pretty standard stuff to grant them their wound rerolls targeting enemies on objectives. We have a Chaos Rhino to buff those guys, alongside 3 Mutalith Vortex Beasts to go alongside Magnus the Red for some midboard control. 3 units of Zangor Enlightened with Fatecaster Greatbows, a big unit of 6, which is probably where the Incandium Sorcerer is going to hang out, alongside 2 units of 3 for utility, and a unit of Zangors to hold down the backline. Overall, relatively standard stuff from Thousand Suns, but this detachment definitely has been proving its worth over the course of the Codex release so far. And especially given the fact that it does have solid matchups into heavy armor, like Imperial Knights, that does mean that it can potentially fight into this Knight and Death Guard heavy metagame. Now with that, we're going to move over to the 71-player ECDC Presents the Big Sky Open 2025. This event was won by Chaos Knights. Colin K taking the event down with the faction. Colin was playing an Infernal Lance. This is the detachment that allows Chaos Knights to perform essentially Dark Pact to the Chaos Gods, taking a leadership test to grant themselves a Malefic Surge that can be expended later on during the turn. If you fail the test, you suffer D3 mortal wounds, but either way, pass or fail, you're able to expend it for an ability, either 3 extra inches in your movement phase, lethal or sustained hits when attacking, or a 5+ invulnerable save against everything, as well as a 6+ feel no pain. This detachment also shores up Chaos Knights' relative squishiness when compared to Imperial Knights with some powerful stratagems. We have things like Diabolic Bulwark to give a 4+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks, and we have Hellforged Construction to grant them an Armor of Contempt bonus in the fight phase. So we have some defensive technology for both phases. What are we applying those to? We have a Cerastus Knight Atropos, double Knight Despoilers. Both of these are taking Despoiler Gatling Cannons. Now, we don't have things like Titanic Duel in this detachment, but we do have Warp of Vision to grant these things ignore cover. And if you are firing into non-T12 enemies, the Despoiler Gatling Cannons are absolutely horrifying in their output. We have a Knight Rampager as well, alongside some utility from 3 units of Wardog Carnivores, and several allied demons. 2 units of Nurglings unlocking 2 additional non-battle line demon inclusions. That includes 1 Beast of Nurgle, which gives you a good scout for turn 1, as well as a Sloppity Bilepiper. Now, I've actually been playing the Sloppity Bilepiper in a couple of my lists. The benefits that he have is that he has an OC value, unlike Nurglings. He's 55 points and has the Deep Strike ability. I think he would be a Beast of Nurgle in most lists if you had 10 more points to spend, but unfortunately, alas, it cannot be so, and so we get a single infantry model who can teleport around and score secondaries. He's actually really useful. He does basically literally nothing, but just being able to deep strike a single model into random places is actually actually pretty sweet. He does also force battle shock tests on enemies at the start of the fight phase within 6 inches to potentially then apply the Harbingers of Dread Chaos Knights abilities to them, which is kind of a little cute synergy, although that doesn't come in that often. Most of the time you're just using him as a deep striking utility unit. Now we're going to continue talking about Knights for one more entry as we move to the Alpine Cup Summer Sprint. This was a 59-player GT held in Austria. Now, the event ended in a draw in the finals. Again, as I said in the beginning, this is a differential scoring event, so draws are very common with this style of scoring, so that's not too surprising. We saw Niklas Frerichs go undefeated 4-0-1 with Chaos Knights to win the event. We just talked about Chaos Knights, so let's talk about his second-place finisher, Louis Steinmerling, who went 4-0-1 with Imperial Knights, tying in the finals. I appreciate Louis here because of his respect for his opponent, giving you a playlist of songs to play during both his and his opponent's turns. Good start to any list. Now, this style of Imperial Knight list has become very popular, especially when dealing with the opposing Knight armies in the meta. Actually, streaming team events over the course of the weekend, and I imagine that this is one of the big impetuses for including this list in a event on the lead up to the WTC, where I think this style is going to be very popular. We saw a ton of this build. This is a triple Atropos Imperial Knights build. Now, it's a surprising no one, in my opinion, that Cerastus Knight Atropos, after getting a points cost reduction to be the same cost as all of the other Cerastus Knights, is the most popular. It is just the best one, and I don't think it's even particularly close, unless you really want to melee from a Lancer. But the Atropos does everything all in one tin. It shoots well, it fights well, it's fast, that's all good, and especially good against opposing super heavies, because not only does it gain bonuses against vehicle and Titanic units, but it also grants additional bonuses to the armigers that it bondsmans. So it's just incredibly good in a situation where you're trying to win the mirror match super hard. In this case, Luis was playing a Noble Lance, obviously, that's basically the only detachment played for Imperial Knights right now. Canis Rex, 3 Cerastus Knight Atroposes, no enhancements whatsoever, following that up for Armiger Helverins. They add a little bit of more flexible OC to the army. They add some longer range shooting. One downside of the Cerastus Knights is that they do tend to be kind of short range, especially when they are trying to apply damage from their concentrated Las Cutter attack that only shoots 24 inches. Armiger Helverins do not have that problem. They can fire even farther, and they can gain huge bonuses from being bondsmaned by the Atropos, which allows them to get little friends that will get rerolls against Titanic units. And then from there, you just have 4 enormous, obnoxious knights who are incredibly efficient. Canis Rex and 3 Atroposes is good in basically every situation, full stop. So it's great. Now, with that, we're going to move to one of the larger events of the weekend, the Salt City GT4. This was an event held in Syracuse, New York. The event was won by Brad Chester, rocking Aeldari. Now, Brad was playing a War Host detachment. This is the maneuverability-focused detachment that gains bonuses to your battle focus abilities, as well as additional battle focus tokens to spend. Now, this list in styles like it are incredibly popular right now. However, they're kind of like bisected down the middle between Eldar players rocking this versus rocking Aspect Host lists, or in some cases super weird Seer Counselors or Guardian Battle Hosts. But generally speaking, a War Host list is going to be the most consistent. We are playing double Autarch in this detachment to give rerolls on those random movement characteristics, whether that's advance rolls or battle focus moves. We have one of them with a Dragon Fusion Gun, the other one with a Reaper Launcher. The other benefit there is that Autarchs are going to give you a free command point to use. And the big benefit that War Host has is that it has multiple ways of jumping out, shooting your opponent, and then hopping back into a transport after you've attacked. We're rocking Fuegan as well as Janezar and Lycus for some Phoenix Lord support. 2 units of Corsair Void Reavers to act as early game utility. You get a very nice high efficiency scout unit from those guys, so they're just a solid inclusion. Plus they get a blaster for a little bit of anti-tank if you need it. We have a single Wave Serpent. This guy's going to be carrying around a large unit of what looks like Dark Reapers in this case, or I guess we could even hot swap between Dark Reapers and Fire Dragons based on the situation. Looks like we are rocking a unit of 10 Dark Reapers as well as a unit of 10 Fire Dragons. We then also have a smaller unit of 5 5 fire dragons. Now, the smaller fire dragon unit is usually used as more of a trading piece. The larger one, however, is the home for Fuegan. That gives you a big brick of units with relatively long-range, high-efficiency anti-tank guns that can interact with your opponent without being able to be interacted with. As long as you have the Wave Serpent nearby, they can hop out, shoot, and then at the end of the phase, Skyborn Sanctuary to hop back into the transport. Similarly, you can also use Fire and Fade to hide them behind walls, and you can do the same thing with the Dark Reapers. Now, the benefit there as well is that we are likely putting our missile launcher equipped Autarch into the Dark Reaper units. That's going to be able to use his free command point to use Fire and Fade or Skyborn Sanctuary at the end of the phase for free. So we have 2 big anti-tank ranged bricks that are both able to attack while not being attacked back. We then also have a smaller units of each, a Dark Reaper squad and a Fire Dragon squad of 5, usually used for smaller trading units. Following that up are 2 units of Howling Banshees. Now, with all of that shooting, we need ways to interact with the opponent's objective. That's what the Howling Banshees do. One of them attaches with Jane Czar. Jane Czar can give auto 6 advances on the Howling Banshees. The other one attaches to the Autarch. He gives them rerolls and acts as another source of damage output inside the unit. So we have 2 little aggressive disruption pieces that can go out and range onto your opponent's objectives. Speaking of ranging, we also have a Ranger squad alongside 2 units of Swooping Hawks for some utility, 2 units of Warp Spiders as well. Now, the Warp Spiders can also combo with Lycus. There is a sustained hits with ranged attack strat for Warhost, so we can give enhanced critical hits to a target using Lycus's ability, and then reroll all of our hits to try, and then use a sustained hits effect to try to gain sustained hits. You can also use the Fire Dragons to fish for critical 5s for additional sustained hits that then reroll the wound rolls as well. So we can do kind of insane damage with the big bricks of Fire Dragons, and the Warp Spiders allow them to swing up into multiple enemy targets very easily. So these styles of armies have been played for, I mean, they're good in general. They have a good breadth of matchups, but being able to interact with super heavies and big heavily armored stuff while not being able to be interacted back by them by hiding or jumping away allows this army to play into multiple heavily armored bricks just fine. Now, what it doesn't like to see, especially with a unit outside of a Wave Serpent, sometimes we see either a Falcon in one of these with Malgan Ra to give devastating wounds, or we see a second Wave Serpent to carry the second brick of attackers around, whether that's Fire Dragons or whether that is a Dark Reaper squad. We only have the 1 vehicle in this list, so one of those units is either going to be in strategic reserve or it's going to be on the battlefield. We don't want to play into indirect fire with that, so things like Mortarian's Hammer could be tough, but otherwise, this army does have a pretty solid matchup into most of those kind of mathematical stat checks that are just trying to beat you by outmathing you with things like Imperial Knights or with Death Guard, simply by having more efficient units than you. And this army being able to kill them without having to trade for them is a huge boon. Now, with that, let's move over to one of the other largest events of the weekend, the Kent Major. This was a 100-player event being held in the United Kingdom. And while it did see some strong results from Death Guard and Imperial Knights, as we can see here, it was eventually won by Christopher Radford running Blood Angels. Christopher was playing a Liberator assault group. Now, I think most of this stuff is going to be things we've seen before, but we do have a little bit of Death Company technology, which is cool. This includes a Blood Angels captain with Rage-Fueled Warrior. So that's the Foot Space Marine captain equivalent for Blood Angels. He gets a couple of additional war gear options. Basically, he's able to take an Inferno pistol. I think he gets a sword option as well. It's a little bit different, but it doesn't really matter hugely. He's mostly just a normal Space Marine captain. Rage-Fueled Warrior gives him the ability to sustain hits 3 once per game. You can use that alongside Finest Hour to give him devastating wounds and extra attacks. So he's swinging extra attacks. Each of those extra attacks has a higher chance of rolling extra attacks because of Rage-Fueled Warrior, so he's able to absolutely go insane. We then have Chief Librarian Mephiston. He's a great early game piece to jump up into the center of the table, be a lone operative, fight first, be annoying to deal with for enemy utility, and just generally bully your opponent. We have Commander Dante, as well as a pair of Death Company Jump Pack captains. These guys are Blood Angels character models, so they are able to stave off the Black Rage for nearby Death Company, granting them their OC characteristic back. They grant sustained hits to their attached unit as well, and they're just generally efficient characters. When they are destroyed in melee, there's a chance that they deal mortal wounds back to the unit that attacked them. They also have the opportunity to, they also grant sustained hits to their unit, and with alongside their hit rerolls from Black Rage, allows them to do some pretty serious damage. We then have Lamarties, as well as a combi weapon lieutenant, a intercessor squad to hold down the backline, 1 impulsor alongside 2 units of 5 jump pack assault intercessors, pretty standard stuff there. We have a ton of Death Company jump pack marines, 1 unit of 10, likely for Lamarties to jump into, as well as 2 smaller units of 5 to jump in the Death Company captains in. These things are relatively inexpensive, somewhere around 200 points. They have sustained hits, they have hit rerolls, they're relatively fast, and they're also able to do some pretty serious damage when you come back to kill them. So overall, just nice little packets of insanity. The fact that you are in Liberator Assault Group as well puts their Strength 8 weapons up to Strength 10. That's a huge breakpoint for them to clip out enemy light vehicles and heavy infantry and things like that. We also then have a unit of Sanguinary Guard. That's for Dante to jump into to add another big brick of powerful melee attacks with a long threat range, thanks to his leadership ability. We have a scout squad as well as a Stern Guard veteran squad. The Stern Guard veteran squad is likely where we're attaching our Blood Angel's foot captain, though they will give him rerolls to wound, targeting the Oath of Moment target. You normally want to Oath of Moment your target anyway, because you want to get hit rerolls, try to fish for Rage Field Warrior triggers to gain those 3 additional hits from sustained hits. The Stern Guard veterans then also grants the whole unit's reroll wounds targeting the Oath of Moment target, so he has a better chance of not only scoring his sustained hits, but also his devastating wounds. If you get this combo off, this dude is fully capable of killing a super heavy Titan by himself. He can kill a Knight for sure, if he really put his mind to it. Otherwise, he will just ding it up significantly, and being delivered by the Impulsor, it's relatively difficult to stop. He is an absolute monster. He can only do it once per game, obviously, but for not too huge of an expense, this guy is an incredible piece. Now with that, we're going to move over to the Saw Must Go On. This was a 76-player event being held in Spain. The event was won by Death Guard, but Death Guard are boring and make me want to sleep. So we're going to talk about Miguel Dura's Leagues of Votann. Miguel was running an Oath-band detachment with 2 Einherjar champions. One of them has Appraising Glare to grant you additional judgment tokens targeting enemies on an objective. The other one with Grim Demeanor to prevent his unit's stats from being modified. That's a big benefit if attached into a big unit of Einherjar Hearthguard, so we'll see if we have those guys in the list. We have, looks like, 2 units of Hernkin Pioneers alongside 1 unit of 6 Brokir Thunderkin. No attachments for them though, they're just going to be vibing by themselves, but for only 160 points coming out of Strategic Reserve, they are actually a very efficient reserve attacker. We have 2 units of Chthonian Berserks, as well as, there it is, 10 Einherjar Hearthguard to go with that Grim Determination Einherjar champion there, so that's an enormous amount of damage available to these guys. They do have a teleport crest on the Chassir, so we are able to rapid ingress them into horrifying places on the battlefield and do some pretty crazy damage. We then also have a unit of Hernkin Jaegers to block up the midboard, 2 units of Hernkin Pioneers alongside, look at all of them, 6 Sagittor ATVs. Not a Hecaton land fortress in sight here to date. We are instead including 2 units of 5 Chthonian Berserks into those, and then splitting out 2 units of Hearthkin Warriors into 4 units of 5 to absolutely swarm the battlefield with these things. So we have OC2 OBSEC Infantry in 4 Sagittors, backed up by some pretty serious damage from 2 units of Chthonian Berserks in 2 of those Sagittors. The Sagittors themselves, with their powers combined, can do some pretty serious damage. Obviously, the Brokir Thunderkin are also good at hopping in and blowing up a vehicle once per game before they probably get picked up on the crackback. However, we also then have 1 Einherjar champion by himself. Now, these guys don't have any way to teleport around, so he's just going to be ground pounding it, and he can't go in any of the Sagittors, so he's just going to be wandering around. He does need to be on the battlefield for that Appraising Glare to trigger. However, he does act as a kind of a little counterpunch unit, but obviously the big one is that once we are stuck in and your opponent has to come in and punch back into the Sagittors that are stealing their objectives, you can use those Sagittors to gain a lot of table space, use that then to rapid ingress in the enormous, big, huge unit of Einherjar Hearthguard, and then those guys can deliver the killing blow to your opponent. Love this list. This list looks absolutely wild. Very finesse-oriented, a lot more so than we see a lot of Leagues of Votann lists, so it's cool to see Sagittor spam doing well. Now with that, we're going to move over to Scotland in the UK for the 36-player Lock and Load. That's the name that I love. I appreciate a good pun. This event was won by Jerry Wheeler. Now, you might not recognize that name, but if you are a member of the TacticalTortoise Discord, you might recognize the handle XDC Docky, because he is a very prolific player over in our community. So congratulations to him for going undefeated with Awakened Dynasty Necrons. This was a Canoptic Wraith-focused list running no less than 2 units of Canoptic Wraiths with all the fixins. That starts with Illuminor Seraz to act as just an absolute pain in the ass to kill. Unfortunately, we don't have any battle line units on the battlefield whatsoever, so his buffs have no effect. However, he is a situational lone operative with a 4+ feel no pain, not terrible offensive stats, and the ability to resurrect thanks to Protocol of the Eternal Guardian. So he's just going to wander around and be an annoying guy for the entire game. We then have the Silent King, a Psychomancer, which is largely going to be a relatively inexpensive utility character. He's 55 points. He can't attach to anything in the army, so he's just like vibing. However, he does grant things like the Canoptic Scarab Swarms +1 OC if we don't want to be committing Illuminor Seraz or the Technomancers to that position. He also forces battle shock checks on enemies within 18 inches of him at the start of your command phase, potentially, so you can use him to mess with enemy stratagem usage or to flip objectives under your control. So that also doesn't require him to be visible to the enemies, so you can just simply sit him in the middle of the battlefield behind a ruin somewhere, regenerate him if he dies with Protocol of the Eternal Guardian, and then continuously force -1 battle shock checks on enemies to potentially switch objectives to your control, which is especially annoying if you have units like Illuminor Seraz to just stand on those objectives. It'd be obnoxious to get rid of. We have a Scorbeck Lord with an Aging Durable Bond, so another 4+ feel no pain character to regenerate back into the army. We, in fact, do not have any Scorbeck Destroyers to attach to him. He's just hanging out by himself. We have a Technomancer with Netherrealm Casket for -1 to hit, as well as a second Technomancer for the second Wraith unit. Following that up, we have 2 Doomsday Arks, as well as a single Locust Destroyer, a unit of Canoptic Scarab Swarms. They're a very good early game utility piece because the list is absolutely lousy with Cryptex to give them their +1 OC bonus, but otherwise they are just vibing. And then a unit of Ophidian Destroyers for utility and a Flayed One unit. Basically, we are going to be getting most of the work in this list out of the Silent King, 2 Doomsday Arks, and 2 use the Canoptic Wraiths, and then we have a ton of utility between the characters, the Locusts, the Canoptic Scarab Swarms, Ophidian Destroyers, Flayed Ones, everything else in the list, and Psychomancer as well as Illuminor Seraz. Basically, everything else is keyed towards being either an annoying character to get rid of or being a utility unit that can score you points, which seems to have worked. So congratulations to Daki for taking down the GT with that. Now, with that, we're going to move over to British Columbia for the appropriately named BC BBQ Brawl. This was a 31-player GT, held obviously in British Columbia. That kind of goes without saying. This event was won by Peter Scott. It did have a bunch of draws in the lower-ranked players, but it did use differential scoring for whatever reason. But Peter Scott was running Tyranids and the new detachment Subterranean Assault. This detachment's fallen off quite a bit thanks to its absolute inability to beat Imperial Knights, essentially. So it is not played very often right now. However, it is incredibly effective with basically infinite capacity to maneuver its units around the battlefield, assuming that you have burrowers remaining in order to do so. This list includes the Death Leaper, a unit of hyper-adapted Raveners, a Neurotyrant, the Swarmlord, and a Trigon with the Trigon Prime enhancement. We have a unit of 10 Hormagaunts. That's for some onboard utility. Their OC2 can advance in charge, so they can just either try to mess with your opponent in the early game, push back their screens, or flip their objectives without you having to commit the expensive Deep Strikers to the fight. We have a Biovore, an double Exocrines to add some backline shooting. These guys are also pretty effective with the natural reroll once they hit that the army has, meaning that you don't need an Exocrine to hit your target to gain rerolls. The Exocrines will also just have them themselves. So instead of supporting the rest of the army, they can actually do slightly more damage. Interestingly, we also then have a Hiveguard unit. Now, these guys are pretty common in this detachment specifically because it does have basically the perfect stratagem for them, Enfilading Emergence, which gives them sustained hits as well as, importantly, ignore cover. The shock cannons that they have are anti-vehicle 2 weapons with a relatively high damage. The downside is that, first of all, they do nothing to monsters, so if you play the mirror match, sucks to suck, I guess. But they also are only AP1, don't ignore cover, and most enemies will just save out of them on 3s. So being able to situationally ignore cover with these guys allows them to actually deal damage to enemies with a high armor save, which is pretty exciting. That is also including a Pyrovore, which can also jump out of a hole and strip cover from enemies too. We then have 2 Lictors for some early game threat, 1 unit of Raveners, probably as just an independent up-downer to create tunnels for the army to pass through. Usually you could attach those into the hyper-adapted Raveners in order to give them some additional beef. However, you don't necessarily need that in most instances, and the Raveners are pretty useful just acting as a utility unit to build the tunnel infrastructure that you need for the detachment. We have a Tyrannofex as well as a Zoanthrope unit to attach in with the Neurotyrants, another good applicator for Enfilading Emergence because we can give those guys ignore cover and sustained on their big laser beam attacks as well. So lots of anti-tank shooting in this army between the Zoanthropes, the Hive Guard, as well as the 3 ranged monsters, the 2 Exocrines and the Tyrannifex. We have a little bit of offensive melee in the form of the Swarm Lord and the Hyper-Adapted Raveners. The Raveners don't hit particularly hard, but reroll once they hit does shore up their one weakness, which is their hit roll, pretty well. They are twin linked in melee and anti-monster, anti-vehicle 5, so they're probably putting a lot of their wounds through. The downside is that they are just sustained hits 1 in melee. Reroll 1 shores that up quite a bit. The only real melee threat, obviously, is the Swarm Lord and the Trigon, but they are usually all you need, especially against lighter armored targets. And the Swarm Lord also has the additional effect of just being able to pop up in the middle of your opponent's army through a tunnel marker to then apply his CP tax aura onto everything. The big downside is that you'll probably have to up-down him, or down-up, as it were, in order to get his aura on target, which means he's likely not generating you command points unless you tunnel network him, which you could do, but it basically just is wash anyway, because then he's just spending his 1 command point on that. I would love if Games Workshop saw fit to bless Tyranids with a slight decrease in the cost of their Tyrant models, because let's face it, at this point, the Tyrant profile has been kind of pushed out of being hyper-relevant. I would love to see a small decrease on those guys and play both Swarm Lord and a Hive Tyrant, so you get incredible command point economy between those two, and they're not the worst melee profiles ever, so being able to deliver them would be cool. Plus, I just love Hive Tyrants, and I have like 7 of them, so I just want to play them. Games Workshop, please, let me play my freaking Hive Tyrants. All right, we're back to the One Thick Grand Tournament. I think I just realized the joke here. It's like One Thick Code, right? Is that I think that's the joke there. That's fun. The event was won by Randy Brigham, running Tau Empire. We already talked about the Thousand Suns in second place, but now we're going to talk about the first place finisher, which is a little bit less standard. Randy was playing a KROOT hunting pack. This detachment absolutely rules. We have 2 KROOT Flesh Sapers alongside 2 KROOT Lone Spears. Interestingly, we don't have a KROOT Hawk Flock on either of those. We don't have the anti-Deep Strike aura on the Lone Operatives, but that's not too shocking, I guess. We want to keep those guys relatively cheap so they can go and apply their reroll hits with their ranged attacks. We have 2 KROOT Trail Shapers as well, one with Nomadic Hunter, one with Root-Carved Weapons. We then have a KROOT Trail Shaper with Nomadic Hunter to make his unit faster, plus 3 inches of movement characteristic on those guys, so they're going to be able to screen and body block enemies more easily, plus a KROOT War Shaper with Root-Carved Weapons for devastating wounds. That's likely just a points filler in that case. Following that up, we have a bunch of KROOT Carnivores, 2 units of 20 alongside 4 units of 10. These guys are scouts, they're high objective control, they're obsec, they're stealth, they have an invulnerable save thanks to the detachment ability, and obviously they're Madeline in this case, which gives you an enormous number of really obnoxious units that are going to be running around all over the place, scoring and locking in objectives. We then have even more forward operation available from 2 units of KROOT Farstalkers, alongside some more utility from 3 units of KROOT Hounds, and some backup from KROOTOX, including 3 units of 6 KROOTOX Rampagers and 3 units of 6 KROOTOX Riders. Now, in many cases, we see this list backed up by Tau shooting. So we see a massive number of either KROOT Rampagers or KROOT Carnivores backed up by things like Skyray and Hammerhead gunships to act as the actual damage output. We're not doing that today, though. The KROOT Rampagers are the actual damage output, and for the most part, this army is actually just going to push you entirely out of melee. While it is not too bad going second, because it can forward operate into cover behind terrain features and then bottom round 5 score for big points, it is also pretty good going first, because it's able to scout the majority of the army, use that Nomadic Hunter unit to push even farther forward, to then body block the opponent from moving up and engaging with the KROOT Rampagers. The KROOT Rampagers can then set up to come in and actually deal the killing blow to enemies contesting objectives, which is already difficult because you have to fight through waves and waves of KROOT to do so. Once you do so, they are putting massive numbers of objective control onto objectives, so you may not even be able to wrest control of those objectives from them. Even if you do, you're getting punched by KROOT Rampagers. And all of that is into an army that is majority stealth, majority 5+ invulnerable save, which means that very much like Skitarii Hunter cohort armies that we've seen in the past and things like that, where you have these weird defensive stats across the entire board, more often than not, individual KROOT are going to remain alive from your units rather than simply being wiped out by anti-infantry shooting. And in those cases, they're just printing you points, holding objectives, scoring secondaries. or just body blocking enemies from moving into relevant positions. This army looks like a nightmare to play against. I don't know if it's going to do that much damage, and it does require a particular army to actually remove. If you have a lot of low AP, high volume weapons, that's going to be pretty good, especially high accuracy ones with rerolls and things. However, if you don't have that, it's just going to push you out, especially based on the mission and the seat the player is in, first versus second. Now with that, we're going to move over to a smaller event in my old stomping grounds, the Midgard GT. This is only 21 player event held in Derry, New Hampshire in the US, and it was won by Jeffrey Colpitts running none other than my big boys, the Chaos Demons. Jeffrey was playing a demonic incursion, the original detachment from the Index, obviously many years later, now being wildly improved. This includes Be'lakor, Skarbrand, a great unclean one with the Endless Gift, the great man himself, the great unclean man himself even. Absolutely incredible reason to play Demonic Incursion. Obviously, he is incredibly difficult to kill, one of the most difficult to kill single models in all of 40k, and especially given the ability that he can potentially absorb charges from things like even Imperial Knights, allows the army to actually hold objectives in the face of those terrifying enemies. We then have a Rendmaster on a Blood Throne. This guy is a great inclusion for dealing with big, heavy enemies. He grants +1 strength AP and damage targeting a single enemy within 18 inches and visible to him. That allows him to hold in reserve until such time as he needs to hop onto the battlefield and point his buff onto an enemy that you charge with a bunch of even just very basic Khorne units. Things like Bloodletters and Fleshhounds can actually do some pretty serious damage when affected by the Rendmaster's buff. And when you're affecting something like Skarbrand with it for +1 damage on his already ridiculous damage characteristics, it goes kind of crazy. If you combine the Rendmaster's buff with Skarbrand's buff for +1 attack, you actually go even farther with all of that impact. So that can be pretty crazy. We have a unit of 6 Nurglings. This is largely a concession to the go first role. Demons are actually incredibly strong going second because they have so many deep strike effects. They're able to utilize the bottom 5 scoring to score a ton of points. However, they don't love going first. The Nurglings are able to body block enemies. If they do go first, they can just run up into the opponents to basically face and just sit where they want to sit. And there's very little that your opponent can do about it. They're also really annoying to kill, especially when affected by the +1 toughness from the Great Unclean one. If they're close enough for that, they can be in Bellacor's Aura to begin with, and they're just a nice utility unit. If you don't kill them, they'll probably regenerate over the course of the game. We have a second unit of 3 Nurglings alongside 1 unit of Plague Bearers to hold down the backline. We do have the payoff for the Rendmaster on Blood Throne's buff, a unit of 6 Blood Crushers. These guys do mortal wounds on the charge, in addition to having 6 attacks each between the extra attacks from the Juggernaut as well as the guy on top. They can be affected by Skarbrand, they can be affected by the +1 damage, and all of that can be pretty spooky. We have 3 Beasts of Nurgle to act as scouts and just hold down the battlefield alongside 3 units of Fleshhounds for their flexibility. These guys are able to up down for free without having to pay any command points, which is something that demons sorely need. So being able to just hop around and complete secondaries is very nice. Very scoring heavy army between all of the Hounds, the Beast of Nurgle, and the utility units. So we're going to be focusing very heavily on generating secondary objective points and holding down random primary objectives. And then using the combination of the Blood Crushers as well as the Rendmaster and Blood Throne to rapid ingress and drop in. And if your opponent comes in to try to engage you and force you off your objectives, you can then sort of combo all those things together and counterpunch and destroy whatever it is going to be threatening you. Very finesse list, very difficult to engage with because it's so flexible and so maneuverable. And so as long as you don't get the Great Unclean one bogged down or killed early, it is very difficult to kind of profitably make headway against this list because most of the things you're killing are like Beasts of Nurgle and Nurglings, and you're throwing away large units that then get counterattacked by things like Skarbrand, which is not really what you want to be doing. Now with that, we're going to move over to Canada for Nightwolf's major 40k solo tournament. I appreciate this one because it does give the event organizer an opportunity to show off their persona, so that's good. Commission money well spent. This event was won by Dominic Defoe with a 4-0-1 record. Again, we did use that differential scoring again, which generates so many draws. Infinite draws for 100 years, Morty. And so 4-0-1 got Dominic to the win here, but not 5-0 because we did get that awkward 10-10 in round 2. But nonetheless, Dominic was able to do that running Tactical Brigade Orks, which we love to see. It's been a little while since we've had these guys on the field. This detachment is the Astra Militarum style detachment for Orks. It gives you kind of sort of orders effect for your units. You can take a leadership task that could potentially deal mortal wounds to you in exchange for getting a buff issued by mechs and war bosses. This includes reroll charges, +1 strength in melee, stealth and cover for infantry, or +1 to hit with ranged attacks. Now that +1 to hit is the big one because we're going to be able to apply it to pretty spooky units that have a bunch of rerolls. So the list is including a big mech and mega armor with mech captain. It's been a while since we've seen a tactical brigade do a lot of stuff, so let's talk about exactly what it does because it's great. The mech captain allows the mega armor big mech to join into a unit of flash gits. It also grants them full hit rerolls, and given that those guys have a once per game use of lethal hits and 1,000,000 attacks, that's pretty good. The big mech and mega armor is the best choice for this enhancement because he grants them a 4+ invulnerable save and can regenerate them back to the unit by repairing their physical bodies, I guess. I don't know. But given the fact that it is a big unit of 10 models with multi-wounds, the 4+ invulnerable save is already difficult enough to get through, so it's often unlikely that you actually lose the whole thing. And having a big brick of guys with full hit rerolls and with ranged attacks is incredibly powerful, especially when using them to, for example, rapid ingress into weird positions that weren't expecting to be shot from that angle. We then have 3 shock attack gun big mechs. These guys are likely going to jump into Luda squads. Yeah, we have, looks like 2 units of Ludas and 3 units of tank busters to attach those guys into. The downside of the big mech with shock attack guns is that they don't have phenomenal accuracy. However, the combination of the Ludas and the Tank Busters allow them to pick and choose who they need to jump into. The Tank Busters will give them +1 to hit and wound against vehicles, and given that the Shock Attack Gun individually has very high impact attacks, those bonuses against vehicles are enormous. However, if you're not shooting against vehicles, you can put them in Luda squads. The Ludas will give them hit rerolls, full hit rerolls, which stacks with the +1 to hit from shoot-a-drills, the order, to basically do the maximum damage that they can with the shock attack guns. So you have a lot of really interesting options here. The Ludas themselves are also very good with that shoot-a-drills as well, because they do get those hit rerolls, but their base weapon skill, their base ballistic skill, is incredibly low. So being able to buff that at all is a disproportionate improvement in their damage output. And their high volume means actually plowing through some lighter infantry units pretty quickly for a very efficient points cost. So we're also including 3 units of Storm Boys. There is a little bit of a Storm Boys sub-theme inside the detachment. We can do mortal wounds on the charge with Storm Boys for a command point. You can also use DAT's Hours in any player's command phase to grant +1 OC to units engaged with enemies. And that oftentimes allows the Storm Boys to run in, charge an enemy, engage them in melee, and then DAT's Hours to improve their own OC characteristic in the opponent's turn to then steal the objective from them, which is really annoying when it happens to you. We then have 2 units of 11 Gretchen, that includes the Run Herd, alongside a big unit of 22. The 22 Gretchen is actually oftentimes a concession to the Cull the Horde tactical secondary, because it will actually lock Cull the Horde in your hand if you have it, and they can screen out basically your entire deployment zone from Deep Strikers, so that's a nice little piece to have for only 80 points. You can oftentimes mess with opponent scoring just enough to get the win. We have a unit of commandos for the early game, as well as all of the shooting units that we talked about. 2 units of Ludas, 2 units of Tank Busters. The Tank Busters don't need much support, but they can potentially get shoot-a-drills to then give them +1 to hit against non-vehicles, which, given the fact that their rockets are blast weapons, actually makes them pretty good into like heavy infantry, for example. Alongside 3 units of 3 Def Coptas. And then we have a truck to either act as a bit of a boat for the Ludas or the Tank Busters, or carry around the Flash Kits if we are not strategic reserving those guys. Very cool list. I think this is the first time we've seen the use of the Def Coptas in a tactical brigade. I don't think I've ever seen that before. But for 80 points, I definitely understand why we would be taking them. They have a high volume melee attack, in addition to a good shooting attack, in addition to synergy with the detachment. Pretty good. Now, with that, we're moving back to Grand Onslaught 10, where, as was foretold, we will be discussing Adeptus Custodes, who actually won the event. Lee Zagrebski went undefeated with a Lions of the Emperor detachment. The detachment that encourages you to play independently, giving you +1 to hit and wound when you're not near other friendlies. We have 2 Alaris Shield Captains, one of them with Admana Mortis and one of them with Superior Creation. That's the enhancements to regenerate that guy back to the battlefield after he's destroyed. We then have a Dawn Eagle Jetbike Shield Captain with Fierce Conqueror, which gives him bonus attacks if he's near multiple enemy models. Interestingly, that does give him 2 additional attacks for every 5 enemy models within 6 inches of him, and that actually does sort of change the math quite a bit, where he's actually very likely to kill a 5-model utility unit by himself without any help if he's nearby them. It doesn't mean that he has to not shoot them in order to keep them at 5 models, but it does stack potentially infinitely. So he could jump into a huge unit of 20, for example, and actually get massive numbers of additional attacks. That would be 8 additional attacks. That enhancement actually probably underplayed from what I've seen, especially on a Don Eagle Jetbike Shield Captain. We have another naked Don Eagle Jetbike Shield Captain there as well. We have 2 units of 3 Alaris Custodians to hang out with the Alaris Shield Captains, alongside 2 Virtus Praetor squads to jump in alongside the Don Eagle Jetbike Shield Captains. Big benefit of those guys is that they are able to Gilded Champion to regenerate their once per game move after fighting, or move at the end of the fight phase, I should say, data sheet ability, so that we can recycle those Virtus Praetors in and out of danger, which makes them very good at skirmishing enemy utility away, clearing them, running away, paying a CP to be able to do it again, and then continue rinse and repeat without having to commit in and actually trade for anything. We have 2 units of Witch Seekers, as well as a Calidus Assassin, and last but certainly not least, let's go, the big man himself, Canis Rex. Again, this is not the last time we're going to see him in this video, and not the last time we're going to see him shore up a struggling, I would say, Imperium subfaction. I kind of almost wish that Imperial Knights Canis Rex gets nerfed into the sun, but that everyone else's Canis Rex stays at 380 points, because it is cool to see armies like Adeptus Sororitas, Astra Militarum, Adeptus Mechanicus, Adeptus Custodes, even Imperial Agents to some extent, using Canis Rex to effect, because we don't get to see these factions at the undefeated tables that often these days, and if it takes an undercosted knight to do so, is it worth it? I don't know. But Canis Rex gives you a very strong late game piece in addition to a strong ranged attack. Doesn't require that you play anything like Caladius Grav tanks that don't have great synergy with Lions of the Emperor, and instead he can just sort of wander around and do his own thing. Meanwhile, we have, as I mentioned before, the Virtus Praetors, very good at skirmishing with enemies, jumping in, killing a unit, jumping away, and hiding behind line of sight blocking terrain. We have the Alaris Custodians that can rapid ingress for free thanks to their shield captain, and then either unleash the lions to then pounce on multiple enemy objectives, or hammer blow enemy vehicles. And that's all followed up by Canis Rex, who, after you've dealt with all of these tiny units of custodian guards running around, having the beef to deal with a knight afterwards is a little bit tough. So this list is cool. This is a cool, incredibly sweet list. Very different than anything else we've seen. No Custodian Wardens, no Kyria Draxus Custodian Guards squad, all shield captains on bikes and stuff. That's sick. What a cool build. Now, with that, we're going to move over to Marietta, Georgia for our final list. This is the Slanesh Summer Slam 2 Solaxi's Revenge Iron Man. Now, for those who don't know, an Iron Man GT, if we look at the event schedule here, is a 1-day GT. Normally, GTs play over the course of 2 days with 3 rounds on day 1 and 2 to 3 rounds on day 2. Sometimes they get a little spicier with their schedule. For example, in this one, you start at 7 a.m. and you play all 14 and a half hours through until 9:30 p.m. This is an absolute marathon of resilience, and many players peter out before the end because their brain is just fried, which is why it's important to play armies that you are familiar with, can play in your sleep, and are not particularly complex. So oftentimes we will see things like Imperial Knights, Chaos Knights, these real big stat check armies being played in these Iron Man events because they're so simple. Shout out to Kurt Lindner, who played Gene Stealer Cult. Are you kidding me? Man, this is an absolute masochist. David Purcell did win the event running Astra Militarum and a combined arms army. Now, Astra Militarum has actually been played a little bit as an answer to things like Knights, because they can provide almost army-wide lethal hits. So, to all of your vehicles anyway, when targeting enemy vehicles, you can take big, punchy vehicle weapons and just improve their damage output slightly to the point where they start to actually chunk down these heavy opposing vehicles. Now, in this list, we are running Ursula Creed, a Cadian command squad, alongside 2 Rolgadorn tank commanders. Let's go. One of them has the Death Mask of Alanius, so he is going to retain an OC value even if he's battle shocked. allowing him to hold down objectives even when he's low, which for Rogaldorn tank commanders is very often, because oftentimes these guys will just suffer crippling damage but not necessarily die, and this allows him to potentially hold those objectives without even having to resort to duty and honor to try to pass those battle shock checks. We have a unit of 20 Acadian shock troopers in there. When they include a platoon command squad inside the unit, they gain cover when benefiting from an order. So you can issue them take cover and they just survive for days. They're 23 plus safe models at that point, the equivalent of, unless you ignore cover, which makes them very difficult to shift in a lot of situations. We have 2 units of Kaddish and Jungle Fighters for some forward operation. Looks like 2 units of 3 Ogryn, which are a nice little utility unit. They're relatively inexpensive, and they're good at clearing other utility units. They're one of those weird squads that, for really low points, have an extremely high volume of attacks, especially if they get into melee. So being able to use these guys to just kill enemy light units without having to expose things like, I don't know, Tempestus or your Rogaldorns is a big deal. We have a unit of Tempestus Aquilons for utility alongside a Leman Russ Exterminator for +1 AP, 2 Scout Sentinels for the reroll hits for the Rogaldorns, 2 Chimeras to carry around those Kaddish and Jungle Fighters. So we have a lot of early game scoring between the 2 scouting Chimeras, disembarking, or even just embarking the Ogryn, honestly, to then deliver those guys to objectives. But then we have the 20 Kaddish and Jungle Fighters running up. Plus, that's followed up by 25, potentially, Acadian shock troopers who can run up and take the objectives in the sort of mid to late game. And then, last but certainly not least, we're backing up the shooting from those pair of Rogaldorn tank commanders with Canis Rex again. He's like salt and pepper for Imperium factions. You just add a little pinch of him, and he makes everything a little bit better. Not to mention the fact that he is relatively easy to play, which is good for an Iron Man event. You don't have to play lots and lots of overlapping vehicle synergies with lots of officers and orders. If you just take a quarter of your list and you dedicate it to Canis Rex, or a fifth of your list, I guess, in this case, because he just does his own thing. He can also sort of mess with your opponent with his Sir Hector popping out and messing with what ends up sort of being able to be scored on him. So he's a great inclusion, not only for the format, but also for the style of list. And with that, those are all of the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Let me know down in the comment section which one is your favorite. Big thanks to Lighter Creative for sponsoring this video. Go check them out in the link in the video description, as well as big thanks to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise, whether that's over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise. YouTube channel members, you can join in the link down below the video, as well as Twitch subscribers who help support me while I live stream. All of you are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.